Good afternoon to everyone who is joining our session. My name is Elena Milanovska. I am Associate Director for Housing Finance Systems with CE, CIS, and MENA region, a lot of acronyms, but we are speaking about Central Eastern Europe, the Commonwealth of Independent States, and the Middle East, North Africa, with Habitat for Humanity International. I'm really delighted to host the last session of the second REELIH Regional Conference, and the session will be focusing on improving homeowner association legislation. The duration of the session will be 90 minutes, and we will be staying 10 minutes more for the closing remarks of the conference. We will have during this session 5 speakers that will share their experiences from CEE and also CIS region. I would like to apologize in advance for any technical problems that might arise during this session. So as we know, we are on the virtual platforms. This is how these days the conferences are run. And please feel free to post any of the questions that you have it in the chat box, and we will try to address all the questions that would be posed there. I would like now to introduce all the participants. So we have Elena Solgayova. She is the co-chair of the Housing 2030 initiative, and she has been with the Slovak government for very many years and one of the instrumental people and a leader in the legislation for the homeowner association and scaling up the renovation wave in Slovakia, which is an example that she will be speaking quite a lot today, but also she has been speaking on the other sessions as well. We have Andrew Popelka. He is a senior energy advisor as part of the Energy and Infrastructure Division Bureau for Europe and Euro-Asia with USAID, who is the sponsor of the REELIH project. We have Besim Nebiu. He is the director of the Central Eastern Europe and the Commonwealth of Independent States with Habitat for Humanity International. We have Nadezhda Kamrakulova. She is the project officer at the Sustainable Energy Division with UNECE. And lastly, we have Arsenik Holeyan, project manager of the residential buildings at Habitat for Humanity Armenia. So if you can go on the next page, we have Ludmila in the back. She will be helping us with the presentation. I will just explain what is the plan for the session and how we are planning to break down. So we will break down the session in 3 different parts. In the first part, we will be speaking a lot more about the learnings from the gap analysis. And the gap analysis that we've done it were benchmarking Slovakia as a positive example of the scaling up the residential or the homeowner association renovations wave in comparison with the 4 Western Balkan countries, North Macedonia, Kosovo, Serbia, and Bosnia. Elena will be speaking about how the legislation that was set up in Slovakia helped scaling up the renovation of the multi-apartment blocks. Andrew Popelka, who actually commissioned us to do this study, will be focusing on the findings of this study, and we will have Besim that would focus on the takeaway, especially from the perspective of Habitat. And I would say when we talk about Habitat, we're talking about from the perspective of someone who was implementing this project. Then we will have a couple of questions to the speakers. We will move to the second part where we will be focusing a little bit more on the CIS region and learnings from Armenia, Moldova, and Kyrgyzstan. So we will have Nadezhda. She will be presenting the gap analysis on the national studies in Armenia, Moldova, and Kyrgyzstan that were done by the UNECE. And then we will have Arsenik. She will be presenting the successes of the legislation changes in the Armenian national law. At the end, if we have a time, we will try to address a couple of questions from the audience and also have a little bit of a discussion and maybe the key takeaways for the audience. Pardon me. So before we start with presentation, I just want to set the stage. There is the most important thing. The national government is has a very crucial role in creation and enabling the environment for the homeowner association. First of all, to become responsible, but also reliable entities in the marketplace. If we do not have a proper legislation about how do we manage the homeowner association or how the homeowner associations are managed, it will be very hard to be restructured and making sure that they can collect and build the resources for the maintenance of the common spaces or the spaces they share in the buildings. In our region, CE and CIS region, the legislation about the management of the homeowner associations are not transparent. And that's one of the reasons why the banks are not able to, I wouldn't say trust, but to get on board with providing and creating a credit lines for renovation of the buildings through the homeowner associations. This is one of the main bottlenecks in the process of the renovation for the residential building stock. So we are really trying now through this session, during this session, to introduce a couple of examples and positive examples, like showcasing Slovakia as a leading example on how we are empowering homeowner association through establishing a proper legislative. And this is a background for these entities to become investable, become bankable, and become part of and do those renovation for their own buildings. In the continuation, we will be speaking a little bit more about the case of the Armenia, where we were working quite a lot as Habitat for Humanity Armenia on the changes with the legislation and the national law, and bringing the first successes, but also we will be speaking a little bit more of what was their experience in influencing these changes and working with the national government together, and also following up the challenges that are post changes of some of the legislation. So I'm really glad to have all of these speakers that will have an opportunity to present and also discuss a little bit more the crucial role of the national government. So I would invite now Elena. So Ludmila, if you don't mind to pull Elena's presentation so she can
I don't have a presentation, no.
Perfect.
I followed the instructions which came first in July, and they said no presentation, just a brief introduction of the topic. So I will try to do it. Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and it is actually really a pleasure and honor to present something you as experts call as a good successful example of solution for certain kind of challenge. I have to apologize to all those who attended the previous session, because what I am going to do, I am going to go through again the same list of issues, but I do believe we agreed in the groups that the repetition is the mother of wisdom, so hopefully it won't be boring. Well, so coming to Slovak example, yes, I have to start by saying that today in Slovakia we have a holiday because we celebrate 32nd anniversary of so-called Velvet Revolution, which in November '89 brought tremendous changes to our lives. And one of these changes, which came later but are with us till today, was the process of privatization of housing stock. Slovakia, on the census in '91, had approximately half of housing stock in private ownership. Approximately 1/4 was public rental and 1/4 was cooperative. At the census of 2011, in 20 years, we became the majority as owner-occupiers. So we have more than 90% of ownership in private ownership, owner-occupiers, and only less than 9% is public rental and cooperative. And what were the challenges in these early 90s in this privatized housing stock? The stock, understandably, was with neglected maintenance and repair. But fortunately, when we started the privatization, the same law, which actually made this transition of ownership, actually created also the framework for condominiums. So in 93, the law on condominiums was adopted. But the new owners in multi-apartment buildings were absolutely not prepared for the new responsibilities. They were not aware of hidden debt and of this neglected maintenance. Many of them believed that by paying this very funny fraction of the real value of the flat, they wouldn't have to pay anything in the future anymore. And they were reluctant to participate in decision making. And they were not aware of the responsibility for common spaces and equipment. And also, even if they were, in that time, no long-term affordable loans were available at the market. So this was the situation at the beginning. And now Slovakia actually is one of the quoted best practices. Because now in multifamily apartments, which is nearly 900,000 units, we have more than 60% already refurbished, and relatively refurbished with a good quality. And this happened because there were many complementary steps taken by the government and by all the partners during the process, and I would like to go very quickly through these important steps. So it is not purely the legislation, but this is really the complexity of all the actions which must be taken actually in a sequence in order to bring results. So already in 1995, so 2 years after the privatization started, the new state housing policy was adopted, and it actually named refurbishment of multifamily housing as one of the priorities of the state. So refurbishment and energy efficiency measures and modernization stayed as the priority of the state housing policy till today. We already made in 1998, so 5 years after the privatization started, the state financed the inventory and technical assessment of total existing housing stock in condominiums, which also brought estimation of the costs needed to refurbish. Then this legal framework for condominiums, which was in place since 93, made it obligatory to have either the homeowners association or professional manager who were in charge of running the shared spaces. And it was obligatory from the very beginning to contribute for the owners to so-called fund for maintenance and repair. And this was actually crucial, even if people were not very keen to pay and contribute, but it was stipulated by the law, so it was obligatory. Then, because of this fund for maintenance, later on, it became also the sort of guarantee for loans from commercial banks. So it was possible to borrow for modernization of these multi-apartment buildings on behalf and on account of the owners, either through homeowners association or a manager. So it was the simple and transparent setting of partners, and it was simple to create such a loan. So it was not all the families, all the households in the house, but it was just the representative, either the association or a manager. And this fund for maintenance became the guarantee for loan, which was very important. There were also other steps which government took early in the process, because we started with incentives in the form of subsidy in 98 already, to attract these owners who were reluctant to do anything, to do something. And then in 1996, we introduced so-called State Housing Development Fund, which is a sort of revolving fund or national bank targeting housing. And from the very beginning, it provided the loans also for refurbishment, but it required technical project with proper technological processes described as a prerequisite for granting the loan. And loans were very beneficial, and they were combined with this subsidy. So this attracted the first daring owners, and then the others followed, because I think that it is a very important psychological moment, that it is very difficult to change attitude of people by just campaign. But the best practice, if some neighboring house was refurbished and they could see the result, so it makes them also keen to follow. Then very importantly, there is a very good description of the roles and responsibilities of all the actors, both in the national housing policies, but also in the law on condominiums. And then the government spent a lot of effort for communication with owners and managers through the umbrella organizations. We introduced also the law on professionalization of managers. It means that the managers are really technically, legally, and economically capable to explain to the owners what kind of work must be done, what are the options, what are the possibilities for financings. And for all this, very important was the exchange of experiences between EU countries and UNECE level, because it enabled us to really to have well-informed evidence-based policy. So I think that this is more or less about the Slovak case for the beginning.
Thank you so much, Elena. So we can go with Andrew, and then as we finish with Besim, we will have a couple of questions for all of you. Andrew, please.
Okay, just checking if you're hearing, because I had yesterday I had some cracking issue, so let me know if because I'm calling from the overseas, so it's kind of difficult. All right, well, thank you very much for the giving me the word. I actually am very, very close to the issue of the housing sector, even if I'm a power engineer. I actually studied in Slovakia. That's why I'm really interested in what is happening in my former home country. I actually studied in 1990, working under the USAID project with the Housing Institute, and got immersed into the issue. And I actually at that time I realized how complex it is, logistically, socially, politically, financially. It's a really a heavy lift when you work, when you work with the people. And then when we talk about the Homeowners Association, we're talking about many people, many decision makers. Okay, and I actually, with all due respect for many other colleagues in this development, donors, they actually, many of them, and understandably, they shining away, from the residential sector. They like to work with the municipal sector, public buildings, but there's one decision maker, there is one, there's a public budget and so forth. So this is probably the most difficult. And when you look at the, from the energy point of view, it's one of the largest consumer, okay, and the largest emitter of the CO2 as we, just on the heels on the COP26. So I actually was very fortunate to be able to, sort of commission this study, the gap analysis. And that was one of the main reasons, was that I saw how Slovakia, is making a huge progress compared to countries in Western Balkans, in the Eastern Partnership, and see, one country can do that and the other country cannot. So what's the difference? So what is so that was actually the motivation to see what works and what doesn't, what needs to be changed, and actually categorize, sort of prioritize the action. And actually it came out in the discussion, and actually in the results of the study, it came out that the legal and regulatory environment is the most important. Okay, because nothing else will happen without a proper legal basis. You know, that's, I mean, and I'm not a lawyer. I just, you know, am guessing. So we had it, and but actually it's not just, you know, that's the important. But then you look at the, you know, how is the energy efficiency implemented? How is it enforced? How is it publicized? You know, what's the benefit? You know, the outreach, you know, just to educate the people, educate the owners, educate the businesses who can actually make money on it, and so forth. You know, what is the sort of a capacity building, and what is the outreach and the information flow, and then actually, as we know, you know, governments have a lot of money. You know, they collect taxes, so they have a lot of money, but they don't have enough to do all the refurbishment. They do not have enough, so the public can help. The public money can help with the grants and with that, but actually private money has to be involved in that, because as you know, it's actually the like in the Western Balkans, it's about €4 billion market. Okay, which can be actually accessed, and banks can have a, you know, a field day, but then they are not in the process of losing money. They have to make money, or actually at least not lose the money. And so making that situation sort of with acceptable risk, you know, that's another issue. So when we look at it, when we sort of commissioned the study, and you know, you both were both on screen were involved in the study and provided. You know, I was just you know, managing it as well. So you know, the in depth, you know, how difficult it was, and all our, you know, colleagues from, you know, us from Armenia, and people from Habitat, you know, the other people. So we look at the in the gap analysis, we're looking at the regulatory, you know, what's the difference? We're looking how the energy efficiency is being, you know, perceived, and what is the banking colleagues, you know, calling in the banks. And you know, when you look at the large IFIs, you know, they actually, when they go, when they, you know, put a loan, they're looking at the sovereign guarantees. Okay, so they don't have this. But when you go into the private commercial, you know, banking, well, they have to have some sort of a confidence that they can actually do a real business. So, but the first we look at the you know, what has to be done. What is the difference in the legal regulatory? We found a lot of differences. Okay, we found actually it is in the report is actually nicely, you know, sort of summarized. It's not only the first thing which actually comes to mind. We looking at the law on homeowners association. You know, some country calls it condominium association, condominium act, maintenance law, or, you know, there's a different name, but with the same, you know, same subject. When you look at the Slovakia, you know, and then now we go into the gap analysis. When you look at the Slovakia, the study shows that there is a 75 laws which are somehow associated with the homeowners association law, and there is another 31 norms. Okay, well, if I pick Serbia, there's a 6 law and 6 bylaws. Okay, the thing is not really, you know, doesn't play very well. So we'll have to look at, you know, every country has a different, you know, has a different legal system and different, you know, documents, and so. But looking at it and see how that can be sort of a transfer, the knowledge. Because Slovakia, as you know, Elena will I hope agree with me. There was a lot of mistakes in the 90s. You know, when it started, there was a lot of mistakes. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. There's no need to get the same mistakes again and again. So looking at it, and I that's one of my sort of a private, you know, thing is get to Slovakia and look and talk to people. You know, the thing I really liked was the a state issued loan guarantee fund. In US they call it a private mortgage insurance. It's sort of a guarantee that the bank will get repaid. Now, my understanding is that system doesn't work anymore. Was cancelled because there's no need for it.
Absolutely, there is no need for that.
Yeah, there's no need for this because the banks will take the guarantee, the maintenance and the reserve fund. So that they sort of the system was started. It's a lot of things which I don't know if we have time to. I don't think we have time to go through the detail. But looking at, let's say, when we go back to the the condominium law or law on association, there's a lot of things which are sort of like seems like a nitty-gritty details, but they are very, very important. I was actually involved personally and all the respect for EBRD in about 7-8 years ago have tried to were funded the law on condominium improvements amendment in Moldova. Okay, it was very well written. It was with the Slovak support, the expert from Slovakia. Well, actually went through the public. It went through the public commenting, and when it actually made it to the parliament, it was a completely different document. I didn't recognize it because there was a lot of private interest, or a lot of interest of different groups which did not want to do this, did not want to do that. So it's a difficult process. So looking at one thing which I would point out, and which is a lot, but one is that in the old regime, in the old system, when there was a I don't know what was the like a home maintenance organization, the OSB or whatever it was called in Slovakia. The thing is that there was people paid to one account, and it was actually used for 50, 100, 150, 200 buildings. People did not know what they're paying for, so they were reluctant. So one of the things which sort of made it to several of the countries' law was the one building, one account. So actually people knew what they're paying. So I'm just showing this as an example of how it is to have the details. How is protected? How is the account protected? What is the how it is being voted on? If you have one country, I'm not going to name, says in order to invest, you have to have 100% of the agreement of all the participants, all the owners. That will never happen. It will never happen. And it is difficult to have the filibuster, to have the 60%. That's difficult, but actually might be doable. Some countries have that, or simple majority. That's very important. How it is voted for. Oh, sorry. Oh, the how it is managed. Is it necessary? Some countries have actually, it has to be homeowners association. There's no other way. Okay, but in Slovakia, it is it can be manager. The important thing is not what kind of structure it is. It is important that the building is being maintained properly. Okay, because that's the purpose. Some countries have the thing that they do the homeowners association as a business, so they actually go into the profit loss. Okay. Hoping that they will actually reduce the fee with gaining, from the business, the profit from the business. But actually, there is also the other way. They can lose the money, and who is going to be responsible for that? So there's many things. So I don't know how am I doing with time, but the some of the revelations in the study, which I sort of took, is virtually all countries when they have this process done, they using for motivation, they're using the grants. Okay, and we have discussion yesterday about how grants have to be used very carefully, otherwise they distorting the commercial market. Okay, the banks, private banks, don't have that money, and governments don't have enough money to do it for everybody. So that has to be very, very careful with the grants. One thing is that there is a lot of education to be made and a lot of work to be done to de-risk the investment for the banks. Okay, banks would actually like to do that. I mean, we know that, the team who did the study, talked to many banks. They would like to do that, but they just don't like to waste money. I mean, lose money, So that's that education is sort of showing them how big of a market it is, how to approach it, and actually there is a big role for the donor, for international donors, for the organization, USAID, GIZ, whoever is involved, to actually help to improve the legal regulatory, and actually do the public outreach, that the education. We don't have to, like, one of the things which and I will finish with that. One of the things which REELIH project didn't do, we didn't fund the material, we didn't fund the labor. We actually provided, the REELIH team have provided the assistance, technical assistance, and taught people how to do things, because that's the sustainable way. And with the word sustainable, I will finish my discussion. Thank you very, very much for listening.
Thank you, Andrew, so much. I will ask Besim now. He is one of the co-authors of the study. First of all, I would like to inform everyone that the links of both studies, the one study for CE, the gap analysis, which is the benchmark and through the showcase of Slovakia, but also the UNECE for Armenia, Moldova, and Kyrgyzstan are available on the deal room. So please feel free to reach out there. And Besim will speak a little bit more about the key takeaway from the research that we have conducted. Besim, floor is yours. You're on mute.
Yes, that's what usually happens. Thank you, Elena, and thank you everybody for attending these sessions and the speakers. I will start with a little bit of background. My involvement with multi-apartment buildings doesn't go back to the 90s. It actually starts in 2009 when, and I'm from Skopje, Macedonia, and I was working with Habitat, and we did the first 3 buildings renovation in Macedonia that year, in 2009, with the support of USAID. And those were the first ever 3 buildings, I think also not just in Macedonia, but in the wider Balkan region. And that gives you a little bit of perspective. I mean, this was a pilot project. We just wanted to show that it's possible to do it. And it sort of sparked the initiative, which then developed into the Macedonia Residential Energy Efficiency Project, which then led to residential energy efficiency for low-income housing, or as we know it, the REELIH project, which we developed in 2012. So it's the 9th year. So let's say for 12 years, we've been trying to crack the question of how do you go about retrofitting multi-apartment buildings, which are almost 100% owned by tenants and owner-occupied, 95% owner-occupied. Deferred maintenance for a generation now. People not very keen on working with each other. and not too well informed about what they can do together, right? And I think that's ultimately where we come from as a housing organization. Early on in this journey, we discovered that most of the initiative to renovate the building stock comes from the energy sector, which in itself represents a little bit of problem, because the problem is a housing problem. It happens in the houses of people in their buildings. And while the energy policy can provide a lot of incentive, it doesn't regulate the housing sector. So the gaps don't exist in the energy sector so that you solve it solely with energy means or energy policy means. And I think this is one of the first early on learnings that we have, in the first generation of projects, is that you need to translate a little bit the language between energy people and housing people, because they neither speak the same language, nor they always understand each other, nor have the same goal. And if that doesn't happen, it becomes very difficult of a riddle. I mean, Elena, before this session, was talking about puzzle. Yeah, I would say it's a puzzle, it's a mosaic, and you have to work simultaneously in consort with on different aspects of the puzzle, so that you fit the elements in a way that they make sense. And that is very difficult of a feat, and there is a reason why it didn't happen in many of the countries in post-socialist world, and that is that early on in the 1900s and 2000s, they didn't have the capacity and the drive and the championship that Elena and some of her colleagues in other countries had for their countries. So there was actually no ownership of the issue, especially not in the housing sector, and also very little in the ways of housing policy. The Western Balkans countries have housing policy which is meager and doesn't really go into the existing stock. It goes mostly, it talks mostly about developing new stock, and oftentimes is combined with other policies such as the demographic goals and social goals, etc. So with all that in mind, when we came to unpack the study, and this is one of the things that we want to champion, we want to copy a system where we don't solely focus on one segment, but on the multiple issues that belong to multiple disciplines and are governed by multiple ecosystems, if you will. There are different ways of unpacking those, but for the purpose of this study and for the purpose of our approach, we would classify it into three: homeowner association / housing, legislation and regulatory framework issues and failures. This is the first heading. The second one is the energy policy, which is the standard approach. Most of the donors and policymakers would try to tackle it solely through energy means, which is why it's very difficult to do it in the multi-apartment sector, because it's not the public sector. You have to do decision making. You have to look at the governing laws of homeowner associations and building management. And the third one is the banking sector. Andrew said it. I'll use the example of Macedonia. There are 12,000 buildings that require renovation in Macedonia, and that is several hundred million euros. Macedonian annual budget is about 3 billion euros of the whole country. So if we were to expect that subsidy will renovate the stock, that's just not going to happen. There is no economics behind that, and therefore, creating demonstration projects or even, creating loan lines or financial products which are heavy on subsidy would actually create the phenomena of so-called waiters, right? Buildings who wait for their turn for the subsidy, because the subsidy is not sustainable. I don't think philosophically we have an issue with subsidy, but there is no money for it. Right? I mean, there will be no $500 million or euros from the Macedonian government to renovate the housing stock. We do know that. That's not the number one priority of fiscally, politically, economically speaking of the government. Unfortunately, I would love it to be, but it isn't. So then we have to, that takes us to the next takeaway is that we have to look at a commercial solution to the issue. And I think it's also right to look in the commercial solution because there is a lot of people who are poor who live in the stock, but it's a mainstream habitation method. Right, so you have, middle class, lower middle class, and if sometimes even upper middle class, if we use these characteristics, who live in the stock. So I think it is only right that there is capital involved, because that's the population that lives there. So the bank is not willing to give loans to homeowner associations for reasons that Elena Grzegorz earlier on, I mean, he's not at the session, but we had a discussion on this very subject today earlier, because they are not used to it. There is a risk and risk perception question, which we unpacked in the study. That's the third element of the study. The banking sector, their appetite, the way they perceive risk and the way risk really is. And these two normally are not always the same, because risk perception and real risk differ sometimes. But we believe that we can do many things to alleviate risks, and some of those things were said, such as guarantee instruments, credit instruments, support to homeowner associations so they clean up their books and work better, collect the fees, have demonstrate a record of payment, 90% plus, which is what banks would take. But I think eventually it comes down to what was mentioned by Andrew. We need to show positive examples, use champions, link banks. I mean, banks are conglomerates, so they know each other. So, but our assumption is just because Raiffeisen Bank is doing a specific product in Slovakia doesn't mean that Raiffeisen Bank in Kosovo will do the same. It's managed by different people. They have their own targets, their own corporate strategy, are not familiar with the homeowner association product. And as was said earlier, they want to make money. They don't want to lose money, but they're also not the most revolutionary of the sectors. I mean, they don't want to jump into risk without understanding the product and the legislation and etc. So I think the next takeaway here is we need to do activities and effort in a concentrated way to de-risk. And that de-risking has two components. One component of de-risking is obviously improving, bettering, simplifying the law, like it is in Slovakia. The Slovak law is much simpler. The law which governs homeowner associations or condominiums is much simpler than the Macedonian law, the Kosovar law, the Serbian law. They have, the agglomeration of different borrowings from different laws which were put into a system which is dysfunctional, right? So I think simplifying the law would go in the way of, and the regulatory mechanism would go in the way of legally de-risking. Connecting with obligation laws, civil codes, things that govern payment and non-payment, I think would be enough in the way of creating, mainstreaming the legal and regulatory framework, and then connecting it basically with normal methods of debt collection that exist for just about anything in these countries. And in most of them, with the exception of Bosnia, they're relatively easy, with the exception of one part of Bosnia, the Federation. In all the other three countries and Republika Srpska, it's relatively easy to collect debts these days. So I mean, in parallel working this with the banking sector to do a little bit of more convincing, a little bit of more pushing, because I think the example shows, and the Slovak example is a great one, but we have also example of Ukraine, which is also a great example. And our friends from IFC and EIB who were in the previous session talked about it quite a bit. So Julia and Greg, it does work also in different contexts if you do the right if you do the right steps and if you have the right ownership. And I think once one bank develops a product and finds out that lending to homeowner association is not riskier than doing consumer loans to or credit card loans to general population, or car loans, which are commonplace in retail banking in these countries. When there is that assumption, I think there would be much bigger uptake than there is now. So in conclusion, I think the single biggest takeaway here is that you need to facilitate this thing. It doesn't facilitate itself, because had it facilitated itself, there wouldn't be a problem today. And it includes, facilitation of all of these subsystems, translation of the language of the people and institutions speak. I think they are well intended, they just don't speak the same language sometimes. So there is a need to be the hub and to be the convener in it. And I think by itself, that's a bigger priority than to have to cover the technical aspects of energy renovation, or the housing renovation, or condominium management, or legal aspects of it. And I think it's basically a house which doesn't have it doesn't have a housekeeping and doesn't have a facilitator. So my biggest takeaway is that in every country in the region, there should be champions, and there should be institutional infrastructure to support connecting these dots. And that's pretty much what our goal has been over the past 12 years in this. And I think the gap analysis kind of reflects that. It identifies pain points, it identifies policy goals, but it also identifies the need of somebody connecting the dots, because they will not connect themselves. I'll stop here and go back to you, Elena.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Because it sounds like I'm echoing.
Yes, we can.
Okay, fantastic. So I would like to pose probably the same question. I will pose the same question, but I want an answer from a different stakeholder perspective. So what would be the role of the national government in enabling and helping renovation of the multi-apartment buildings? So what roles they can play? So Elena, you were part of the government, and you have been working for a very many years. If someone is starting a similar project, or they want to influence, what you would suggest that would be the role of the government, what role they can play?
Well, I believe that the governments actually, their role is the key role, because they should be the initiators. They should understand what the challenge is. As Besim said it very well, that you need a certain hub where you put together all the partners, and partners are very many, with many different backgrounds and many different interests. But this is, unfortunately, it can't be anything else or anyone else efficiently than the government. And actually, I also represent this Housing 2030 initiative. And this is the initiative of the countries, of the housing providers, of Housing Europe, of UNECE and UN Habitat. And we actually presented the report to the ministers responsible for housing this October. Report is available at the web page, and I will send actually the link that people can find the report. And one of the findings of the report, the general recommendation was that, keeping in mind climate change, COVID challenges, financial crisis, we witness that there is a need for a much stronger and active role of the national governments in policy making, that we need the long-term strategies. And this is something we need to have, the long-term strategy, what we want to reach from the point of view of energy efficiency and affordability for people. And this means that also then the government is responsible for initiating proper legal framework. As Besim very clearly said, that it is a question how the acts are formulated, and then to really harmonize activities of different actors. And well, in the best case, also provide some money which will start the process. This was the case as the good case and the actually positive case of Slovakia, that we actually started from the small, but we continued through nearly 25 years. There were no changes, there were no abrupt endings of the program. So again, this stability, long-term vision is extremely important.
Thank you so much, Elena. Andrew, I would have the same question for you, but it's more from the perspective of the donor community. And you have been involved for a very many years through USAID and having a lot of projects running. You have a lot of learning. So what do you think would be the role of the donor community? What role they can play in successfully implementing these kind of projects?
Yeah. I will actually start with the negative. Okay. In the past, and actually doesn't include or exclude any donor, there were sort of tendencies to actually do demonstration projects, and it was a demonstration after demonstration after demonstration, which actually helped a few people in few buildings. Did not have really this concept of sustainability. And that is the past, okay? And I know that now things are changing. The IFIs are working on salesmen are calling. So IFIs are have changed a long time their attitude, and so did the donors. So what I think that where the donors a good role and good position in this development is to do things which improve the legal and regulatory, help the countries, because no donor can actually tell country you have to have this law. Okay, that's pretty much everything. So to help them to draft it, to organize the action, which will actually bring the knowledge, bring, as I said before, bring people from the countries where improvements, bring them to countries where there's a good legislative environment. Slovakia, Lithuania, Latvia. It's people who made a progress in the countries. And the other thing is that they actually can do this publicity, the outreach, and they can actually do. I would not really be a very big fan of donors coming with a lot of money and try to subsidize things, and so. But I don't have to worry about it, because when you look at the tendencies of the donors now, okay, they don't do that. They actually, when we in the energy efficiency, when like EBRD is running the E5P program, which is a grant program, and so they actually support the larger investment. They support activity which actually support the loan. I would actually be on the side of trying to minimize it even more, not to incentivize by giving the money away, because there's no money. There's nothing wrong with the subsidies, but there's not enough money for everybody. So don't use taxpayers' money to only a few select.
And for the sustainability as well. I mean, if we are subsidizing, I mean, we are not sustainable projects. Yes,
that's just just look at the sustainability of the activities. If you have to do introduce as a donor some technology which is not really that common, okay, yes, do the demonstration project, but don't stop there. Okay, just do sort of a planning, and actually also the donors should actually help the countries to do the planning, to year plan in implementing energy efficiency in renovation of the building. And actually one thing which renovation wave and associated funds from the EU. As we heard, the donor's role could be actually to prepare money to use the funds, which are coming from EU. So they are prepared, because there is some cases which we know is that there are some money which are available from different different funds and different programs. People don't know how to use it. People are not really. So there's a plenty of work for the donors. That would be my take.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Besim, you somehow touch upon, because the last question would be, what would be the role of let's say the national organization, NGOs, or international development organization, but from the perspective of those that are implementing this type of a project. I think that you summarized very well, at least from the perspective of Habitat, the facilitation aspect, because we have so many different stakeholders, the complexity of the issue is significant. Do you have anything else to add on the top of the facilitation that you think it's important that we can play the role in the whole process? You're on mute again, Besim.
Thank you. So, I mean, just a couple points that I want to add. I think in Europe, there is a consensus that housing should be the job of the, housing for the citizens. There should be a social contract where it's the national government and the governments generally that are responsible for that. So I totally agree with Elena. I don't think an NGO like ours should be the housing provider of solutions. The government should be. We should be doing two things, however. We should be advocating to the governments, and sometimes we should be supporting the government, and sometimes maybe we should be criticizing the government when it's not doing what is clearly doing the wrong thing. When it's doing the right thing, we should be supporting it and giving it advice if we have the advice, or connecting it where the advice is attainable. And I think this example exercise is perfect. I mean, you have countries like Slovakia, Czech Republic, Ukraine. I mean, they're coming from a very similar point, and they are better than the others. So let's see how the betters have done what they've done. And I think NGOs have a role to do that, especially regional NGOs like ours, or more global NGOs, because we have that comfort of position to see things from a different perspective and look at multiple countries. Most people look only at their country. We should understand that, especially in the government sector. And being able to navigate regionally is an advantage in this. We should use this. This is one other thing other than facilitation. Should be a promoter and catalyst, and sometimes we should show by doing, because sometimes it's better to do something and then show it how it's done, and then there will be an uptake on that rather than talk about it. And I think especially Habitat is good about showing rather than talking about a subject. So I wouldn't call it demonstration project necessarily, but there are things that are better. Like, for example, Habitat Macedonia is working with the Macedonian government to do the typology of buildings.
Yeah,
but it's just easier to do it like that.
More of a showcasing.
Yes. Sometimes it's also good to step in the market. For example, some of our NOs have created social enterprises which are providing specific services in the ecosystem. As a, for example, in Macedonia, we have a building management company, which we fully own and operate as Habitat Macedonia. And it does have, maybe a goal of creating certain income for us, which is a, very self-driven goal, but it does have the role of improving services where they lack in the residential energy sector. We also are treating it as similar, because we work with other management companies as Habitat Macedonia. So we are treating as one of the management companies. It's completely differently branded from Habitat, and it works by itself, more or less. It manages about 2,000 apartments right now in Skopje, so it's not that big either, but big enough. So this is the other thing. We can show stuff by doing, but not assume the role of housing provider. I think governments should be housing providers. We pay taxes and we vote for them, so they should be doing it for us. Well, NGOs don't collect taxes and don't get votes from the population. So I think we should be very clear about these things. And I think we should also try to understand the equity and the justice part of this. People live in buildings, come from different walks of life, economic situations and social situations. We shouldn't be harming anybody by the systems we create. And by that, I mean more vulnerable groups. Housing is not only used for dwelling, it's sometimes a commodity. It's a way to invest your savings or to make specific financial investments. So I think we should understand the ramifications of all the policies that we make to the most vulnerable in specific buildings and create measures to target, identify and support them by targeted subsidy, by whatever means exist in the social policy, and combine it with energy poverty policies, which is sort of the topic of this conference, right? And sort of the million-dollar question in this: how do we do that? Okay, that would be my not very short answer.
Thank you so much, Besim. I'm looking forward actually transiting now to Nadezhda and Varsanik. Nadezhda will be speaking about the gaps in the Caucasus and Central Asia, and I'm looking forward to see how much of those gaps are similar and what are the learnings and what we can learn from each other in a different regions, and then have the positive case of Armenia really working what they have done to change the legislation. So Nadezhda, the floor is yours.
Yes, good afternoon to everyone. Do you hear me? Do you see me?
Yes, we can see you and we can hear you well.
Okay, thank you. I hope that my presentation slides will be also on and available for the audience to see.
They are on, Nadezhda.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Just to present myself, my name is Nadezhda Khamrakulova. I work in the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, UNECE. We have a project which is called Enhancing National Capacities to Develop and Implement Energy Efficiency Standards for Buildings in the UNECE region. As part of this project, we actually conducted a gap analysis to which Elena referred, but this gap analysis looked at the difference between the performance objectives set forth in the UNECE framework guidelines for energy efficiency standards in buildings and the actual implementation and the actual existence and the implementation of those standards in 17 countries. These countries are from Southeastern Europe, Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, and five Central Asian countries, and Russian Federation. The particularity of this analysis was that we first took these framework guidelines as a kind of reference point to see what should be the or what could be basically the standards or the consumption of the buildings, what type of outcome-based consumption and what kind of standards could exist in the countries in order to set the quite high standards in order to ensure that the existing and the new buildings at the same time will be performing and will be more energy efficient and will be finally less consuming the different types of energy. So this was the reference point we took, and at the same time we looked at what are the existing standards in 17 countries. We looked at the actual situation, what the standards are, so from the legislative and policy point of view, but we also looked at the situation, how the buildings are actually performing nowadays. This is a bit more challenging part of this analysis to to see the actual consumption of buildings, and especially to see the consumption of the existing stock of buildings. So this gap analysis, looking at what are the gaps between the guidelines, how it should be, and the actual standards and their actual implementation in those countries. So the gap this gap analysis finally identifies the existing barriers to adopting and implementing the high performance standards in buildings in all the countries, and provides the recommendations to bridge the existing gaps. I believe that you all have the links to this analysis, and then you can see in more details. If I may ask to move to a second slide. The recommendations from that study included from different perspectives. It looked at the strategic guidance, at the design and construction of buildings, and from the management perspective. Do you hear me? Because my says that I have bad network quality. Felix.
Oh no, it's perfect, Nadezhda.
I hear you very well.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for this. So the recommendations from the gap analysis, again, as I said, that's let's say the regional perspective from 17 countries says what are the general recommendations, how the governments, mostly it's addressed to the governments, however, it includes also other stakeholders, what should have been done in order to improve the current situation and in order to move to a higher standards for energy efficiency in countries and their subsequent implementation in the countries. I'm always putting this emphasis and actual implementation, because one of the main gaps that was identified by this analysis is that the legislation in most of countries, it's being in progress, in being adjusted in terms of to improve in order to move to further to higher standards. In many cases, it's to move to the net zero building consumption. However, the actual implementation of this legislation, this is what is being a more challenging issue in many countries. How to monitor the implementation of legislation, how to enforce or encourage the implementation of all measures, and how this is addressed or not addressed at the legislative point of view. This is one of the main gaps of all countries that we looked. If we can move to another slide, I would like to speak a little bit in more details about the national studies that we conducted for Armenia, Kyrgyzstan, and Moldova. These are the studies already at the national level, and they were conducted after we had this regional gap analysis for 17 countries. These studies looked at the energy efficiency potential assessment. So it looked at what are the government institutions, how the existing programs and projects are existing, what could be the driving forces, and what are the driving forces for an introduction of energy efficiency measures in countries, what are the existing policies, and what is the existing legislation, what are the challenges that are present now. Again, the analysis looked at the performance of buildings in each of the countries to the extent possible, and it identified what are the differences between, again, the framework guidelines and the set of principles or guidances that are indicated there, and the actual standards that are present in 3 countries. In the end, the 3 studies also identified barriers and provided country-specific recommendations on how to enhance the national capacity to develop and further implement energy efficiency standards in buildings. If I can move to my last slide to provide the example of recommendations from the national studies. In Armenia, and I will briefly mention because we will have a more detailed presentation from colleague in Armenia. So in Armenia, the national study that we conducted identified among the gaps that, despite the existing legislation, is very much improved and is moving, is developing. There still need to be introduced the requirements for near zero energy consumption for buildings. It also, as one of the examples, that the local authorities also need to have better conditions or more possibilities to finance the energy efficiency measures, especially in the longer term perspective, and to provide more financial mechanisms and possibilities also to develop the energy service companies in the country, which are not that developed currently. In Kyrgyzstan, the situation that we looked was a bit different. The legislation is less developed there. The legislation for energy efficiency is, of course, present. It was initially developed at the, let's say, early post-Soviet time. However, the adjustments and the improvements are currently being on the way. There is still a need of work to be done in this area. However, the more problematic area here is that the governmental entity responsible for policy and coordination of activities on energy efficiency is of very limited capacity or almost non-existing, if we can say like this. And then that that further programs for energy efficiency has to be adapted, in particularly to concentrate on the current stock of buildings, and also to aim for the net zero consumption for the newer buildings. In Moldova, the situation, especially with legislation, is slightly different, because they are now looking at adjusting their legislation, and especially the secondary legislation, in accordance with the new decarbonization commitments that the government took for their national determined contribution under the Paris Agreement, and that would require more adjustments of the current legislation, and also development of new further secondary legislation. Again, the country aims more for the zero energy buildings, and especially that requires introduction special incentives and mechanisms for those for the buildings to be more adjusted, let's say, to this situation. And it also requires the activity of different stakeholders, and also in order to ensure that the energy savings technologies would also be more present on the market, to ensure that the implementation of this objective will be possible. I will stop here my presentation. I would just say that, again, from the legislative point of view, there are differences and there are similarities from countries, and that the recommendations for each country are country specific. However, again, we can see that the developments in the countries are different level, but all countries are moving towards more energy efficient standards. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nadezhda. Thank you. And then we have Varsanik. She will be talking a little bit more about the changes in the legislative and what Habitat for Humanity Armenia role was in implementing this project. The floor is yours, Varsanik.
Greetings to everybody, and thanks organizers for bringing this important issue for discussion. Habitat for Humanity Armenia has been implementing residential buildings, common area renovation and energy upgrade projects since 2011. And since the implementation of this project, we noticed a number of market barriers and legislative gaps, which we later tried and did address in order to solve these obstacles in the market. The existing market barriers, one of these is the poor management of residential buildings. And this is because the homeowner associations, who are like majority of housing stock, residential housing stock, is managed by the homeowner associations. There are also other two types of management systems. And they have low capacities, low financial literacy, economic literacy, and technical literacy in managing the buildings. And this need to be addressed by law. The collection rate of the maintenance fees is quite low currently for the majority of the buildings, and this is because first of all, homeowners do not trust the homeowner association. Secondly, people have in their mind the old system where the state was taking care of the housing stock, because initially it was owned by the state before the privatization, and the state was covering all the expenses related to with the maintenance of the residential buildings. And now they don't just they still think that the state will cover these expenses, and there is also no transparency in the management of the funds, because as Andrew Popelka also mentioned, that there is one pot where the money from all the buildings is arriving, one bank account which is managed by homeowner association, and then from this pot the managers are covering expenses of one building and second building and third building, but it's not that clear, like if tenants are paying for what they are paying. Though the current law stipulates that the money collected from each building shall be spent only solely for that building, but in reality this is not the case. This on one hand gives flexibility to homeowner associations, because there can be unforeseen expenses in certain buildings, and this is a way to cover like accidental costs for some buildings, and then take the money of that building and put for the other building. But on the other cases, it brings non-transparency for the management of the funds. And this is also one of the reasons that banks are not willing to work with homeowner associations. And a part of this, there is also legal concerns, which is related to inconsistencies between the laws of homeowner associations and the law of multi-apartment building management. Can we go to the next slide, please? Currently, not only the rate of the payments are low, but there is the law doesn't stipulate the payment for modernization works. It only sets provisions for implementation of mandatory norms. But other works which are also important, for example, energy efficiency improvements or other modernization works, are not foreseen by law. And another drawback is that we don't have availability of data on technical parameters and energy indicators of the buildings. There is no passportization, and this data is not available to the public. And this is important drawback because it hinders the informed decision making by the homeowners and other interested parties. So can we go on to the next slide, please? So having all this in mind, Habitat Armenia addressed these issues by starting its advocacy activities since 2015, where we did analysis of Visegrad countries and the Ukraine on the legal systems, the reforms there which brought success, and did comparative analysis for those currently valid in Armenia. And based on this, we created a set of recommendations which we have submitted to the State Urban Development Committee. The reform of the multi-apartment buildings management law started in Armenia in 2018. And since then, Habitat Armenia has been involved in the policy discussions. We did a review of the presented draft law. Each time they would present this for recommendations, and had sent our recommendations, policy recommendations, to the respective state body. We also organized roundtable discussions and conferences where we would bring together different stakeholders and policymakers and engage them into policy dialogue. Next slide, please. In 2019, a working group was created by the Prime Minister, which was intended to work on improvement of housing stock in general, and including the reform of the multi-apartment buildings management law. And Habitat Armenia was invited to these working group meetings as an external party to express its opinion and also make suggestions. So the policy suggestions that Habitat Armenia made, please move to the next slide, concerned the following aspects. The first one was the improvement of residential buildings management, and we proposed that the law shall establish provisions for the management qualification system. And there need to be established a special manager institute for residential buildings. And there need to be also system and support mechanism for the preparation and training of human resources for this sector. This is very actual for Armenia right now. Another suggestion was that the technical data of the building and also energy data of the building need to be put in passport. There need to be passportization of the buildings, and this shall be available to the public. This data shall be registered in the cadastre, and also the data about the measured and documented data about the common shared property shall be registered in the State Unified Cadastre for each building and for each homeowner, because this is also raising the ownership feeling within the homeowners. And another drawback that we noticed and made a recommendation was that there need to be assignment of responsibilities and rights for both the state and the local self-government bodies, because we have a law that the state is making a policy for the maintenance, management, and operation of the housing stock. However, and this policy is going to the self-government bodies for the supervision, but there are no set responsibilities for and the rights for each part of the implementation chain, who shall take care of the implementing those policies in the right way, and who is taking responsibility of or giving the penalty or of not doing the right work. So can you please go to the next slide? We also propose that the law shall set minimum fees for the mandatory norms, because currently the Assembly of Homeowners is deciding how much per square meter they shall pay for that year, for example, to maintain the building and to implement the mandatory norms. But very often this fee is very little, and it's not enough to maintain the building in proper order. That's why there need to be a minimum mandatory norm, which is based on the main directions of the expenses for the maintenance of the buildings. And there need to be also a reserve fund, and this reserve fund shall be used for the modernization works of the buildings and for to cover the accidental non-planned expenses in the buildings. And there need to be a better enforcement mechanism for the payment of the maintenance fees, because the current mechanism, which is if homeowners are not paying the fees on time, the homeowner association can take this case to the court, but this takes so much time and the resources and documentation that generally the managers of homeowner associations don't do this. So as a result, homeowners do not pay or pay not regularly. And as Basim mentioned, it was also a very important point that we also set in our policy recommendations, that there need to be allowance systems for disadvantaged families. So that and this they need to support the at least partially compensate the fees that shall be paid by the disadvantaged families for the shared ownership maintenance. Can you please go to the next slide? So these were the main set of recommendations we made to the state, and in 2020 we got the first success in the reform, and this success was related to opening one bank account for each building, a separate bank account for each building. And in addition to this, there should have been an online payment system. And they also created the possibility to create a reserve fund for this. And the market response was the following. There was a temporary drop in the collection rate, and almost 1 year has passed, but the majority of payments are still done by cash. So we have lesson to learn from here, because we understood, and now the state together with the self-government bodies are working on the support mechanism and the bylaws which will make this reform easy to adopt, because till now it is not functioning well. So this is, I would also like to state that there are also several recommendations that Habitat made. They are in the process of being done, because we have talked with the State Urban Development Committee, and the passportization of the buildings is in the progress, which also include the energy data in it, and it has been developed and it is under the review process right now. They have in their pipeline to work on the qualification system for the managers, and now they are thinking what would be the best way to do it. And also some other important questions are now in the minds, in the process of being developed by the State Urban Development Committee, and we are monitoring the reform of the law, and all the time we are there to make our recommendations if necessary. And therefore these kind of discussions are very important, especially learning from the best cases like Slovakia and other countries. And for example, even now, I would also very much appreciate to hear any experiences of effective enforcement mechanism for the collection fees, for the collection of the maintenance fees. So that's all for the presentation. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Varsanik. We are also approaching the end of our session, so we will have a few minutes. So I would like to pose the last question, or maybe your final message to the audience is, like, from your perspective, from your work, from the countries you are working in, what is the key to success and in the renovation of the multi-apartment buildings? But I would ask you, all of you, a very short, sweet answer, if possible.
Can I go first?
Please do.
So I think the key to success is patience, because this is taking a lot of time. I mean, it's a generational issue. I think Andrew says this. It's not an issue that was created 30 years ago, and possibly when these buildings were built, the way they were built in the 60s, 70s. But then we inherited it in the 90s, and in order to make big progress, I think we need to have patience first, and second, we need to make this group larger of supporters and advocates of this, because and we need to speak probably the languages which are understood by the general public, and you know, make it less technical. Try to speak more common language and appeal to a wider segment of the population. That's where I would stop.
Yeah. Thank you. Elena, go ahead.
Thank you. Well, I fully agree with Besim that the patience is needed. I would summarize that we need the national governments need to have the clear vision what should be achieved, because they are on the position to have this. There is a need for political support. In which way it is reached, but this is very crucial. Really, this patience and persevering, because it takes time to make a difference. This stable legislative and financial framework without changes. Then this communication with all the stakeholders, and simple systems for applicants if they are so far that they are really thinking about refurbishment. And we need this international exchange, because this is the best way how to find the solutions which are tailor-made. That's all.
Thank you so much. Nadezhda and Varsanik, anything else to add on what already Besim and Elena mentioned?
If I may add, maybe I fully agree that communication with all stakeholders, this is a must, and that improvements in this and building capacities to all stakeholders, but also raising awareness for the public, for those who are living in multi-apartment buildings. It's also a very important part of, let's say, an element of the whole process. From a legislative point of view, if I may add, we realized, based on this and research that were conducted, that it is important not only to have the good legislation and the highest standards for energy efficiency, but it's also important to have the entity which will look into its implementation and enforcement, and to have the encouragement mechanism in place that would involve different stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadezhda.
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
So I think that long-term strategy is very important, that the state has long-term strategy and commitment to do so, and the bottom-up collaboration is also very important. Collaboration with all the stakeholders in the sectors, because we have something to learn from each of them. And learning from foreign experience, because sometimes it just gives you very green path to go. You don't need to do something. You have already the solution. You just need to put and adopt it. That's it. Thank you.
Okay.
Andrew?
I have just one sentence. When all the stakeholders, when they work on those issues and progressing with the renovation, think about sustainability. Don't do onesies and twosies. Think about the way which is sustainable, because that is which gets you to the you know, as Americans say, to the end zone with the ball. Okay, that's all.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, the speakers. It's really a pleasure having you around and sharing your experiences. I hope the audience was also enjoying as much as I did. And I would like to ask officially, I'm closing this session, but I would like to ask the audience to stay for a couple of minutes. We will be having the closing remarks of the conference. So I would like to ask Andrew Popelka to say a few words as part of the closing of the conference. Andrew, together, of course, with USAID, were instrumental in supporting and working with us in developing and implementing the REELIH project, which is our flagship project and a foundation of building the CE and CIS Habitat for Humanity International Energy Portfolio. So we are very grateful, Andrew, for your dedication and mentorship and through all of these years. I think we are approaching close to a decade. So,
okay.
Floor is
okay.
yours. Thanks again.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Well, I would try, but it's difficult, you know, after 10, you know, my 7 years. working with the guys in Habitat, doing accomplish. This is relatively, in the speaking in the terms of development, it's a relatively small project, but has accomplished a lot. So I would take this opportunity to actually also the initiator of this project, who actually started and developed the REELIH project, Bob Archer, who is now retired, but the credit goes to him for starting this. And I just took over a project which was all set up and go. So I believe we all wish that we actually meet face to face somewhere in Brussels, as some of our colleagues, I believe, did. But we have to get comfortable with the constraints of time and technology. So that's the way it is. Yeah. So in spite of that reality, and we're facing this COVID situation, discussion in all 5 sessions, I think were very fruitful, very productive. And I think it's a very nice sort of like situation where we are getting close to the REELIH project. We have a few months to go, and I actually was very impressed with the speakers. The size of the registered people who participated in this. That was, it's very, very impressive, and sort of like we take it as a reward for the hard work, Habitat, and all our colleagues. I'm very grateful. So this second regional conference, really, there was a situation where I had to repeat, sort of repair the text when they were second annual conference. I said, no, this is not an annual conference, and the answer was it should have been. So we should have done this, but the constraints. So yeah, we'll be looking at the future. Yeah, that's a suggestion to take a note on. The conference actually highlighted the successes, and actually what is more important actually is it highlighted what really is ahead. What has to be solved in the countries, and the work at the multi-apartment building has to continue for many reasons. The main reason I see as a person is that the living condition for the people much better. It's more comfortable. It's sort of rewarding. Looking at the refurbished building, that sort of like, it's pretty much a pride of that. So I think the aim of the conference, from all perspective, was very well, and I think that was a very well organized, very well done. And all the organizers, the people who made it possible, and I know that they had stressful time. So, well, not yet, but next week they will relax, and so and I actually, in the end, I was managing the REELIH project from the USAID side, but I didn't really do much, because everything went so smooth, and productive, and the accomplishments are great. So thank you very much, and that's all I have to say. That's one more. Hopefully there will be a continuation of this. Hopefully there will be a continuation, because the work is not done yet. So, okay.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and good luck.
Thank you. And I will invite Besim Nebio now, the director of CIS region, who was responsible for organizing all this conference. His team and himself has been the last 6-9 months. I don't know, Besim, how many months really fully dedicated in making the schedule, developing the program, doing all the logistics. So a big thanks to all of them. And Besim, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Elena, and thank you, Andrew, for your remarks and kind words. This conference was actually scheduled for the spring of last year, and we had even made agenda, sent invitation, reserved a hotel in Brussels, and so the first week of March or second week of March we did have to cancel it because there were no meetings in May of 2020 in Brussels. So that's how life is sometimes. This is almost 18 months later, and we're having a virtual conference with some live interactions in Brussels. I'm actually sitting in Brussels at this moment because we did organize some small gatherings around the REELIH conference and the European Housing Forum. When we scheduled it first, I was the REELIH program manager, so some things have changed in the meantime, and I would like to thank the team who organizes this, echoing Andrew, which is Zita, who is the new REELIH manager, who replaced me in that role, and Ludmila, who is the advocacy assistant, and Juri, who is the advocacy associate director, and all of the three, together with Elena and some other members of the team, which are Mark and Victoria, have been really spending a lot of these months on the conference, together with the European Housing Forum. European Housing Forum will continue for 2 more days, and some of the REELIH topics will be part of the plenaries tomorrow and on Friday. And I think that sort of signifies our approach to this. We believe residential energy is the single largest housing issue in Eastern Europe, because it affects most people. It affects severely a large segment of the population, and if not dealt, it will just deteriorate. So it cannot be neglected or left alone. A lot of it is happening in the multi-apartment sector, and precisely because of that, we are focusing on that. We could also do individual housing. We're a housing organization. We could do all kinds of housing, but because nobody or very few want to engage with the issue, we took it upon us. And thank you, Andrew, for mentioning Bob Archer. Actually, in 2009, I met Bob Archer, and that's how we started this collaboration in Skopje, and then it went to Sarajevo, then it went to Yerevan. We did few things in Pristina, we did some things in Belgrade, and the idea of this conference is basically to multiply the effect. We believe there is a space between the housing, energy, and banking sectors where we can put our act together and leverage on each other's goals and create common agendas. So I totally agree with all the speakers. I think in this, there is a saying, less is more, but in this is not the case. I think here is more. So I think we need to speak more and we need to collaborate more. This is not a competitive effort, it's a cooperative effort. And with Andrew, we've been working for 7 years on the project, and it's actually not a grant, it's a cooperative agreement between USAID and Habitat for Humanity International, and in it there are multiple organizations which participate in the community of practice. I mean, a lot of them were speakers yesterday, government representative, experts, and that's precisely the goal of this. The goal of this is to use the collective wisdom, knowledge, and memory and do the best we can in not very easy circumstances. Right? And that's why I mentioned perseverance and patience, because it could be frustrating to work on something and, you you did something in 2015 and 2019, it's going back to where it was and probably worse 6 years ago. And that has happened in some of these countries because, I don't know, some minister in some government thought it's a great idea to do something, right? So these things happen, but I think having these forums and creating this group of what I would call community of practice is the best we can do. And I think we should not wait for the next conference. We should organize maybe smaller events in between where we focus or dwell on specific issues which are of importance to us. With that in mind, I would really like to thank Andrew for all the support and USAID over the years. I mean, I think it wouldn't have happened without him. And I don't say this lightly just to, make him feel good about it, because it's true. I mean, it wouldn't have. So, and I think it does help the fact that he is committed to the issue. And that's a very luxurious position to be, to have somebody who funds the project and cooperates with it and actually is an advocate on the issue and has an expert on it. So I would really want to thank you, Andrew, for that and for being such a great supporter in this over the years. And I would, in closing, I would like to thank you all for the participation. This time, in 2017 was the first conference. It was 4 years. It's like Olympic Games almost. We thought of doing it last year, but next time we hope it will be much sooner, probably next year, and with smaller events in between. The quality of speakers was extraordinary, and I would like to thank all the speakers that attended and made their contributions. And just so you know, we will invite you for next time as well. So is this the last word? Is there anybody else that wants to say something? Okay, so yeah, Ludmila says this is the last word. So yeah, thank you guys very much. And I would like to invite you to follow energy efficiency topics for the European Housing Forum tomorrow and on Friday.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
bye,
you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Good luck.